Anthills Part 2 by Aaron Braderman. The exterminator comes tomorrow, I told myself in an attempt to remain calm, an attempt that had not a hint of sincerity behind it. Pain. Pain was all that I felt as I was ripped out of my sleep at an hour of night I can't even begin to remember. Though it was pitch black in my room and I had no visual confirmation, I knew what the culprit was immediately. The stinging sensation was the same as I had felt on the back of my neck many days ago. What was different about this time, however, was the area of effect. It felt like the pain was everywhere on my body all at once. As quickly as I woke up and as quickly as I recognized the source of the pain, I leaped out of bed and yanked on my desk lamp cord. My desk lamp fell to the ground and its light shone straight up at my ceiling, illuminating the room with many mysterious shadows that seemed to surround me on all sides. It was enough light to see my current situation, however. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of ants had swarmed all over my body. I immediately began to swat, slap, spin, and do everything in my power to shake loose the insects. All the while, they continued to sting me over and over again. They felt like hot staples being driven into my skin, and they were happening multiple times a second. The pain was so excruciating I felt like I was going to pass out or throw up at any second. As I spun in circles, shaking the ants loose from me, I noticed there were 2 ants sitting on my nightstand. Just like the day at the park, my house, and my kitchen, they watched me. Despite my frantic and fast movements in all directions, they stood steadfast like statues, watching me writhe around in agony the entire time. I eventually had gotten enough of them off of me to the point where I could grab a can of ant spray I had kept in the corner of the room. Almost instantly, I felt the stinging stop. The pain didn't, but I could feel no new stinging occurring. As I looked down, I noticed the ants fleeing from me. The ants on the nightstand were no longer there, and the ones who were just attacking me a moment ago were now scurrying across the floor away from me as fast as they could. They weren't fast enough. They were resilient, though. On average, I'd say each ant took about a 3-second spray to fully stop moving. I honestly think I used up half the damn bottle that night. It's not like I was in any state of mind to have used the thing sparingly. I simply held down the spray button and I didn't let go until I saw no more signs of life in my room. When it was finally over, I counted 85 stings all over my body. They covered my chest, arms, legs, back, and neck. It took a little while, but after I was done cleaning the ant corpses from my room, I decided to take a hot bath to try to soothe my writhing body, and promptly passed out in my bathtub from the pain. I awoke to the sound of a knock on my front door, followed by a familiar, "Hello?" It took a few moments for me to comprehend my situation. I had a splitting headache like I'd never felt before. The pain from my stings might not have been as severe as they were last night, but it was still present. I had fallen asleep in my bathtub and had slept at such an agonizingly weird angle that my legs had fallen completely asleep. On top of all of this, I now had a severe neck cramp. I swear it took all the willpower in my body just to recognize that the person knocking at my door was the exterminator, and with all the energy I could muster, I shouted as loud as I could, "I'll be right there!" Luckily, my tub is a piece of shit. Over the course of last night, my water had slowly drained off by itself, so I wasn't a completely sopping wet, pruny mess. It still took me a few minutes to eventually open the door for the exterminator, though, as I had to get dressed, down 3 aspirin, and splash some cold water on my face. "Are you okay there?" he said as I opened the door. I imagine that my delayed response, toppled with the ghastly appearance I must have exhibited, aroused a fair amount of concern. "Hey man, I'm sorry for taking so long. I had a rough night and slept in," I said while reeling from the sunlight that was now piercing my eyes and seemingly stabbing me in the brain in a way that caused me to wince in pain. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, sir," he said, sounding genuinely concerned. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" I told him the story as I walked him to my room, neglecting to tell him the part about the ants standing on my nightstand watching the entire event occur. "Oh my word, that sounds awful. Well, don't you worry, sir, I'll make sure we take care of this problem today," he said, patting my shoulder in an attempt to comfort me. As he began to inspect my room, he noted the number of ant traps I had strewn about my house. With a slightly concerned tone, he told me, "If you've really taken all these actions that you say you have, then my only conclusion is they must have a nest somewhere in the walls, or maybe even under the floorboard." We talked for a little bit about options and where to proceed. eventually deciding to drill holes into my walls at key locations to lay down bait traps and spray pesticides. Once he was done, he bid me farewell and left. I followed shortly after and headed to work. As I arrived back at my house later that day, I instinctively checked the stretch of dirt outside my front door. When I did so, I found 2 new anthills. Fear, annoyance, and any other emotion I had felt towards my intruders up until that point all faded away and were replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. "God damn it!" I shouted before kicking up dirt all over the hills. "God fucking damn it!" I shouted a little louder as I began to viciously stomp on the 2 anthills over and over again to the point where I swear, if there were some sort of cave underneath the hills, I would have broken through the earth itself and fallen in. After about 7 good stomps, I found myself a little out of breath and while standing over the hills, turned to face the road. A woman who was walking her dog stood there with a look of confusion mixed with a hint of fear. I raised my hand to attempt to explain myself, but before I could do so, she fled down the sidewalk, leaving me alone with my unwanted guests. Fuck, I muttered to myself before kicking dirt over the now decimated anthills and heading inside. I couldn't get to sleep that night. I remember specifically the feeling of being watched was more intense that night than it had ever been up until that point. It mattered not if I faced the wall, away from it, or straight up. I couldn't evade it. With a deep sigh and a rub of my eyes, I resigned myself to go watch some TV for a few hours, in hopes of passing out somewhere down the road. I sat on the edge of my bed and turned on my nightstand lamp. As the light illuminated my room and I could now see my surroundings, I spotted them. Just like the night before, there were once again 2 sentinel ants watching me from my nightstand. Remembering the horror of the night before, I immediately patted down my body, expecting to be covered with the ants once again. I quickly realized, however, that there were none to be found. I slowly turned my gaze up from my body to the ants and knelt forward to get a closer look at them. They stood there staring back at me, and soon enough it was as if we were both analyzing each other. "What the fuck are you?" I muttered to myself. I stretched my hand out and hovered it above the ants in an attempt to get them to move. They did not. "Why don't you react?" I asked as I began to rapidly wave my hand back and forth above them. Finally, in a bit of frustration, I stood up and made a swatting motion towards the ants like I was about to smash them onto my table. They finally reacted and moved backward to avoid my hand. I stopped my hand midair, however, and chuckled to myself. "I got you, little bastards," I said, moving my hand backward. The ants stood there staring at me back. After a few seconds that seemed to drag on for hours, I laughed to myself about the craziness of what was happening. Eventually, I shook my head to snap myself from the never-ending staring contest and went to the floor by the foot of my bed to grab a can of bug spray. When I turned around to rid myself of the ants, however, they were gone, as if they saw what I was about to do and fled before I could take action. I spent the remainder of that night watching god-awful late-night television, eventually passing out somewhere around 3 a.m. The sound of my backup alarm going off finally woke me up. I immediately recognized it as the alarm I used for when I would sleep in the parking lot of the car wash. "Oh shit," I muttered to myself before rolling off my couch and making a mad dash for my keys and shoes. I had 10 minutes to be at a place that was nearly a 25-minute drive away. As I started speeding my way to work in a vain attempt to somehow make it there in time, I began to rehearse my "I'm sorry" speech to my boss. I say began because I was quickly interrupted by the sensation of a sting on the back of my neck. Then another, then another, then another. Just like 2 nights ago, I began to feel stinging all over my body. I jerked and twisted my body in response to the newfound pain, but it did little to ease my situation. I started to see them crawling all over my hands and arms. How they had gotten into my car was a question I couldn't begin to think about at that moment in time. I looked into the rearview mirror and could see them all over my neck and shoulders. They were swarming me and stinging me all over my body. Once the realization of what was going on settled into my mind and the pain began to permeate every square inch of me, I started wildly swatting all over my body in a vain attempt to free myself from the ants, causing my car to begin swerving erratically all over the road. A particularly large sting nipped me in the patch of skin between my left shoulder and neck. Acting on pure instinct, I lunged over to attempt to swat the ant stinging me there. When I did so, the motion of my arm caused my elbow to lean across the steering wheel and send my already speeding car straight into one of the old oak trees that lined the road. I awoke in the hospital a few hours later with a cast on my right forearm and a headache that made the one from the day before seem like a fleeting memory. The doctors told me that I had a concussion, a fractured rib, and had broken my wrist in 3 spots upon impact with the tree. When they asked me what happened, I opened my mouth to tell them, but quickly closed it as I realized that the pain from the stings were completely gone. I pulled up the medical robe I was in and looked down at my chest. There was nothing. No sting marks or any other indication that the ants had ever attacked me in the car. How long was I out? I asked the doctor. You've been knocked out for about, he stopped to pull up his watch, 8 hours now. Did the stings fade away that fast? I thought to myself. They were gone in the morning yesterday too. I thought to myself for a moment about what to say. I fell asleep at the wheel, I said, trying to sound as honest as I could. There was no proof that I was attacked by the vile creatures. They had made sure of it. I couldn't tell them. I was swarmed by and attacked by ants. When there was no proof of the event ever occurring, they'd think I was high or something. That's what we thought, he said as he began to write onto a clipboard. Your blood work came back clear of alcohol, so we figured it had to be something else. Well, son, you're going to be getting all the sleep you could ever dream for. When you never showed up for work, your boss called your phone and we answered it for you. We told him what happened and he told us to tell you that you're going to be getting 2 weeks of paid leave while you recover a little. He said he'll have you doing light duty when you get back, something about a cash register, I think. I chuckled to myself and nodded. After a day of evaluation, I was allowed to return home. I had to call a taxi, however. My car was rendered undrivable by the accident. As I opened the door to my home, dread didn't even begin to describe the emotion that swept over me like a tidal wave. It was the most soul-crushing sense of impending doom I had ever known in my entire life. As I closed my front door, it only grew more intense. After a few moments of standing there, taking in the dimly lit apartment, I slowly lowered myself into my couch and stared at the powered-off TV. As I did so, I spotted the ant that was running along the top of my TV. A newfound sense of anger boiled up within me, and with one swift motion, I grabbed my TV remote and chucked it at the ant. I had to use my left hand, however, due to the cast, which caused the remote to fly dead center at my TV screen, resulting in my TV being now effectively dead. I sat there in stunned silence for a few moments before dropping to my knees and beginning to hyperventilate. Think, man, think, I said to myself between strained breaths, trying to calm myself down. What the fuck do I do? I exclaimed in the vague hope some invisible higher power would tell me the answer and rid me of this nightmare. When no such enlightenment came, and I had finally caught my breath, I sat back against the bottom of the couch and called the exterminator once more. So what are my options now? I asked after informing him that the ant problem had still not gone away. Well, if the infestation truly has lingered on this long, my suggestion would be attempting fumigation of your apartment, he said. Fumigation? I asked. Yes, sir. The only 2 problems with that being 1, it's a very lengthy and expensive process, and 2, since you're in an apartment complex with other tenants living all around you, you would need to get them to sign off on it. Specifically, you would need at least 2 neighboring tenants to sign off on having seen the infestation along with you. That way we could fumigate the whole apartment block that you're on. I sat there in silence for a moment, contemplating who to ask for a signature, and also contemplating whether or not a fumigation would even work at all. Ask your neighbors for your signature, sir. As soon as you've gotten them, give me a call back and I'll work out the details for the procedure with your landlord, he said, sounding a bit impatient with my silence. Will do, I muttered before placing my phone down and sinking deeper into the floor. I could still see the ant watching me from on top of the TV. I walked by it and headed to my bedroom to sleep. It was all I wanted to do at that moment. Wake up. I was awoken a few hours later by a voice whose origin I had no earthly idea it came from. I looked around my room but saw nothing. After sitting upright in my bed, staring into the darkness of my room for a few seconds, I shrugged it off as a dream and reluctantly slowly lowered my head back onto my pillow. The second I made contact with it, I heard it again. I said, wake up. The voice sounded annoyed this time. I willingly obeyed its command and with one motion shot straight out of bed and turned on my light. Half expecting to see an axe-wielding murderer of some kind standing beside me, I was taken aback to discover not an indication of life inside of my room. After sitting in the light for a few tense moments, I began to feel my eyes water up as a cold chill ran down my spine. The feeling of eyes on the back of my neck was so strong I swear it was as if someone had placed a blanket over it. I wanted nothing more in that moment than to cower back into my bed and hide under the covers, but I knew what I had heard. Someone was in my house, and I had to protect myself. I slowly opened my dresser drawer and took out my only means of protecting myself at that given moment. A small Leatherman multi-tool, retracted the pitifully small knife attachment from it and began to sweep my house. I took it one room at a time. Bedroom, clear. Hallway, clear. Bathroom, clear. One at a time, I made sure every square inch of my house was without any intruder. Eventually, I checked everywhere. Every room of my home lay baked in lights, yet I found no one. This did nothing to calm my fears. As I stood in the center of my hallway, I turned my head to the side, knife hand outstretched as I began to listen for any movement of the intruder. "Alex," the voice whispered. I spun around so fast I didn't have time to bend my arm inward, and when I swung, I ended up leaving a cut mark on the left side of my hallway wall. There was no one there. I quickly spun back around the other way and began to slowly back myself out of the hallway and into the living room to make a break for the front door. When I reached the end of the hallway, I thought I stopped dead in my tracks. The feeling of eyes was so strong at this point that I no longer felt it on my back. It was everywhere. My entire body shuddered with fear as everywhere, all at once on my body, I felt like I was being watched. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, frozen. Had the chill running down my spine not paralyzed me with fear, I might have been able to taste the salt from the tears that were now running down both of my eyes. It was, however, not a factor at all at that moment. The only thing in my mind was a primal instinct to sprint for the door and leave. Yet I just stood there. "You took our home, Alex. It is only fair that we get to take yours," the voice spoke. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to make a run for it, but the voice sounded so close to me that for all I knew, the intruder was right behind me, blocking off the door. Where the fuck is he? I thought to myself. "Where are you?" I began to ask the question out loud, as intimidatingly as I could muster at that moment, when I was struck with a sudden epiphany. The voice sounded like it was right on top of me. I slowly turned my gaze to the right side of my body. The ant sitting on my shoulder stared back at me. "Alex," the ant said once more. I felt bile rise in the back of my throat, but forced it back down as I swiftly swatted the ant off of me and dropped to the floor, crawling back and watching it from the hallway wall. For a while, it struggled on its back, but eventually it found its equilibrium and got back onto its feet, staring at me for a few moments before running under my couch and leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. Soon after, the ant fled from my sight and I went to the bathroom to vomit. I slept in the bathtub that night. I didn't plan on doing so, but I spent so long hiding there that exhaustion must have eventually seized me.